Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe, alcoholic, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me back. When I first spoke with Patrick, and he said that the months ago now, and he said that the sort of ongoing theme of this group is emotional sobriety, or that's a topic that comes up a lot here. I thought about it, and I wrote my book a couple years ago before I really was familiar with the term emotional sobriety, and before I actually stopped drinking. So, in thinking about emotional sobriety, it occurred to me that emotional sobriety is really very much what I call emotional independence. So you can probably use those terms interchangeably. And I I thought today to read chapter 6 of my book, which is entitled Emotional Independence. It's kind of my favorite chapter of the book. And you're going to hear stories about my father. My father, he died on August 26th, 2018. So we just marked 5 years since his passing, which I can hardly believe. And I had a um, really wonderful 5 weeks with him in hospice. It was a hospice house, a facility that was just a house in a residential neighborhood. And they turned it into a hospice house that's modeled, if any of you know, in San Francisco, the old Zen Hospice Project had a Victorian house in which they had a certain number of bedrooms that they could take people at end of life for end of life care. So we were lucky enough to come upon this place, and it enabled us to be able to spend, my son at the time was 11, and he and I used to go and even sleep over in my father's room, and we could cook for him and share coffee, and it was really our second home, and the caregivers were our family. So that really actually has nothing to do with anything, but I'm going to be talking about my father in this chapter, and I just sort of like he's sort of fresh in my mind because we just celebrated his 5 year um the anniversary of his departure. Um so I'm just going to go ahead and read. I have no idea how long it's going to take, and then we'll have discussion. And my favorite part of these meetings is the discussion and hearing from you, and questions and answers and comments and thoughts. So, okay, here we go. Imagine that you find a sense of wholeness in yourself. You've got your feet on the ground and your face turned toward the sun. You feel confident and at ease in your own being and in the way you relate to others. At any given moment, you know how you feel, or you know how to figure out how you feel. You have clear boundaries, which means you're not taking on other people's emotional labor, and you're not blaming others for the way you feel. You are aware of the way your words and behaviors affect those around you. You anticipate and adjust your expressions so that you are not creating unnecessary misunderstandings and messes that you will need to clean up later. This is emotional independence, which I define as the state of dominion over one's emotional life without conscious or unconscious reliance on the input of others to regulate one's mood, the ability to self-reflect, self-soothe, and self-regulate. There are three key aspects of emotional independence: cultivating witness consciousness, owning your shit, and taking responsibility for impact. I remember one of my earliest experiences that laid the groundwork for what I now recognize as emotional independence. I spent the entirety of my childhood with birds inside our home. At any given time, we had either a pet parrot, parakeet, finches, or a cockatiel. At one point, when I was in college, my parents even built an aviary and bred canaries. I have a special fondness for birds as a result. When I was 6 years old, my family had a green and yellow parakeet. That's a budgie, if you don't know the term parakeet. Barney liked to walk around on the kitchen floor like a dog, catching crumbs and hitching an occasional ride on a passing foot. One day after school, my father, Rolf, and I were rushing around making a snack on the way out to my ballet class. I was in my black leotard and brown leather sandals, the ones we got on vacation in Cape Cod from a real leathersmith with big, flat, waffle patterned rubber soles. I cannot report the detailed logistics of how it happened. It was sudden and it was shocking. I stepped on Barney. I felt him crunch under my foot. What I saw and heard is permanently seared in my memory. In fact, tears well up in my eyes as I write this now, so many years later. Barney was immobilized on the floor with his back broken. His head and tail were intact, but he was flattened in the middle where my foot had been. The worst is that he wasn't dead. Hardly. He was frantically squawking in pain as he tried to get up. Recognizing there was no way to help him, my father knelt down and took me in his arms. Safe in the sheltered world of my father's embrace, I buried my face in his shoulder and sobbed just a few feet from our suffering pet while we waited for him to finally die. In those moments, it felt like I could cry forever, never reaching the bottom of the well of emotion in which I was drowning. I didn't go to ballet that day. My father made me change my shoes. In fact, he had me permanently retire them. He made sure I knew it wasn't my fault and took me for an ice cream to soothe my aching heart. I'm grateful for how much Rolf got right in this episode. His quick assessment that there was nothing we could do to help Barney meant the bird's already painful death was not prolonged even further by the futility of heroic measures. He held me in his arms and he let me cry as long as I needed to without trying to hush away my sorrow. He remained remarkably present to the situation exactly as it was without attempting to deny it or fix it. We sat on the curb outside the ice cream parlor, and we talked about the nature of accidents and how shitty it feels to unintentionally cause harm. He took responsibility for having helped create the circumstances in which such an accident was likely to happen. As an experienced bird keeper, he might have known to train Barney to stay off the floor. I could tell you stories in which Rolf showed far less grace as a parent, but in this one, he was at his best. I already loved my dad to the moon and back, but sharing this experience with him brought a new level of intimacy and a profound sense of safety. One of the most powerful things he did was to give me context. He probably didn't realize it as such at the time, but taking me for ice cream and processing what had just happened gave me a framework in which to step back and see the experience through the lens of a greater story, all of which had nothing to do with me. Barney's fondness for feet and that he had been allowed to think the floor was one of his domains, the janky time management that meant trying to do too many things in too short a time, and even the fact that we had birds in the house in the first place. By validating my feelings about my role in Barney's death and, at the same time, creating a larger context, my father gave me the gift of what the great spiritualist Ram Dass calls witness consciousness. In his book, Polishing the Mirror, How to Live from Your Spiritual Heart, Ram Dass says, "The witness is your awareness of your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Witnessing is like waking up in the morning and then looking in the mirror and noticing yourself, not judging or criticizing, just neutrally observing the quality of being awake. That process of stepping back takes you out of being submerged in your experiences and thoughts and sensory input into self-awareness." It is the ability to witness ourselves that we find a doorway out of the depths of our emotions. How often does it seem like if you start to feel anger, fear, sadness, or any uncomfortable emotion, that you will lose control? Like if you turn that faucet on, you'll never be able to shut it off. The witness part of yourself exists outside the ocean in which you feel like you're drowning. As Ram Dass points out, your witness doesn't judge or criticize, nor is it in any way attached to the details of your story and what they mean to you. In other words, your witness isn't emotional. Having access to the part of you that exists beyond emotion is useful. I mean, what could be more powerful than that? How many times have I said to myself, if only I didn't feel so much? An example of what witness consciousness can do for us is my client, Anya. In her late 40s, Anya is a partner at her mid-sized law firm in suburban Detroit. She has come to me because in the past many months, her productivity has plummeted. To compensate, she spends far too many hours at work, arriving home most nights after 10 o'clock. She stays up late, oversleeps, gets to work late, and the whole cycle begins again. Social by nature, Anya used to look forward to chatting up her colleagues and went to lunch with them a couple of times a week. Now, she keeps her office door closed for most of the day and spends many billable hours engaging in online forums and social media. Anya shows up to our first session 5 minutes late and irritated. She's lost track of time and is very hard on herself about it. In fact, I notice that she is hard on herself about a lot of things. Anya is stuck in a pattern of self-defeating behaviors, which she then beats herself up about, which lowers her self-esteem, which leads to a feeling of hopelessness, which results in self-defeating behaviors. She withdraws further and further from her life and the people in it as she descends into an emotional rabbit hole. Zoe, I don't know what's happened. It's happened to me. I feel lost and depressed and like I'm out of control. I can't get myself to focus on anything that matters. I'm fucking up at work and my partners are starting to notice, she says. When did all this begin? I ask. About 6 or 8 months ago, she replies. What was going on in your life around that time? I prod. Well, is there something that triggered you? Something that may be hard to be with emotionally? Well, yes, she answers. My ex-husband got married. In what way was that difficult for you, Anya? I feel sad about it. I can't believe he's married again, and I haven't had one single successful relationship since the divorce 4 years ago. I feel her anger, her frustration, her sadness. What are you making this mean about you? I ask. What do you mean? What am I making this mean about me? She replies defensively. My husband got married. Isn't that a good reason to be upset? I love having these conversations because I know how powerful they can be. The more upset my client gets, the bigger the breakthrough at the other end. Yes, for sure, Anya. If you're going to be upset, this is as good a reason as any. Let me put it this way, I explain. Your ex-husband got remarried. I understand what that means for him. He's a husband. He has a wife. He has moved on from his marriage to you. What I'm asking you is what his getting married says about you. Oh, she softens. Well, I think I feel like a failure. The word loser comes to mind. Okay, good. So about 8 months ago, your husband got married and you made sorry, about 8 months ago, your ex-husband got remarried and you made it mean that you're a loser. Hearing you say it, it sounds ridiculous, she says. We went on to discuss how Anya's feelings of failure transferred to her work life and how that contributed to her lack of self-esteem and downward spiral. She was also able to see how she has a tendency in general to personalize things that have nothing to do with her, and how that triggers her into an emotional reaction in which she acts like a toddler. Her words, not mine. After working through Anya's feelings about her divorce and her dating history since, we relieved her of her self-imposed loser status, both in her personal life and at work. To get a handle on behavioral mood swings, I taught her a simple mindfulness trick to cultivate witness consciousness. Whenever she catches herself either feeling or doing something counterproductive or self-defeating, at that moment of awareness, she pauses and says, "This is Anya having a reaction." Articulating this in the third person immediately removes her from the experience of the emotions and the behavior. She is effectively speaking from the perspective of the witness. From there, she can go on. This is Anya having a reaction to Michael's email. This is Anya feeling defensive. This is Anya feeling hurt because she feels criticized, and so on and so on. She has effectively stepped out of her experience into a perspective in which she is an objective observer. From this place of awareness, she sees herself not as a loser, but simply as a person navigating their way through life, having some thoughts and feelings. Over the months of working together, Anya went on to have some of her highest billing cycles ever, contributing to the growth of the practice. We also worked out accountability so that she stayed off social media while at the office. She also opened her door and invited her colleagues to lunch and on mid-afternoon walks. I happily attended her wedding 2 years later. Owning your shit happens to be one of my personal core values. It's something that I look for in the people close to me. In fact, it's at the crux of the statement, we can meet each other only to the extent that we can meet ourselves, which is something you'll hear me say all the time. If we are not taking responsibility for our own emotions, we are unintentionally asking our partners to do so. I'm going to read that again because it's important. If we are not taking responsibility for our own emotions, we are unintentionally asking our partners to do so. Prior to working with couples on their sexual issues, I always begin with parsing their feelings and figuring out which belong to whom. Matthew and Emily are a great example. Matthew and Emily had been married for 7 years and were dealing with desire discrepancy. When he reached out to me for support, he was clearly in distress, and we sorted through what he was feeling. Matthew rants, "She rejects my requests for sex almost all the time, and it makes me feel like shit. It makes me feel bad about myself. She criticizes me all the time. I'm not grounded enough. I'm too impulsive. I drink too much coffee. I eat too much sugar. She should be appreciating all I do for her and the family. She hasn't had to work a day in her life. I know this makes me sound like an asshole, but no, I can't say it." Go ahead, Matthew, say it, get it out. You can retract it after if you want. I encourage my clients to express whatever it is that they're feeling, whether it's valid or justified. It's just, or invalid or unjustified. It's just one part of the equation anyway. Often the most useful information is revealed in the most outrageous or controversial expressions. Okay, it makes me sound like a dick, but is it too much to ask that she wants to take care of my needs by having sex with me? Don't you sometimes just have to take one for the team? While that can be a coercive position to take, there are times when it can be healthy for someone to have sex with their partner in order to care for their partner and to contribute to the well-being of the relationship. But before we work on the nuts and bolts of your and Emily's sexual dynamic, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with you inside of that dynamic. What I hear is a man who is longing to feel wanted, desired. I reflect back to him. Do you feel that Emily loves you? That's the crazy thing. I know Emily loves me. I guess I just don't understand how her love doesn't translate into wanting to have sex with me. I'm facing the truth right now that I don't want to live the rest of my life feeling like I have to convince her, Matthew replies. I'm going to make a slight adjustment to something you said earlier. You said that when Emily rejects your request for sex, it makes you feel bad about yourself. What happens if you say, I feel bad about myself when Emily says no to sex? I suggest. I'm not sure I follow. Do you know the great Eleanor Roosevelt quote, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent"? I've heard that before. Does it mean no matter what anyone says about me, I can't let it affect the way I feel? Matthew asks. Not exactly. You can't let it affect the way you feel about yourself, I explain. That's part of it. Someone's inability to see your value is not a reflection of your worth. I'm going to say that again in case anybody needs to hear that. Someone's inability to see your value is not a reflection of your worth. If someone told us the sky is red, we wouldn't have to think about it. We would simply tell them they're crazy, misinformed, or simply see things differently. But when someone says we are some version of not enough, we tend to believe them, weighing their opinion against our own self-worth. He says, I get that, especially if it's someone who isn't important to me or doesn't know me very well. It's a little harder to do when it's my wife, he said. Yes, for sure. And it's important to listen to her feedback. It's also important to remember that both of you are perceiving and communicating through the lens of your own experiences, good, bad, and ugly. Right, he says. That's where I get confused and react. Of course. Welcome to relationships, I continue. This is the thing with navigating relationships skillfully. We have to remember to take responsibility for our own feelings and to take responsibility for the impact we have on others. These are the two key skills that I'm inviting you to explore. Okay, I'm going to repeat them. We have to remember to take responsibility for our own feelings and to take responsibility for the impact we have on others. He says, I think I understand the first one. So when you tweaked my language around how I feel when Emily doesn't want to have sex, you changed it from she makes me feel like shit to I feel like shit. He's getting it. Exactly, I say. By saying someone makes you feel something gives them all the power. I like to say that we have to own our shit. It's subtle, but language is important. Our words are deeply connected to our subconscious. They are the vehicle by which we shape our reality, our world. Taking ownership of your feelings means that you have the power to affect your emotional reaction. It gives you agency. We continue to talk about tools for taking responsibility for his feelings. For instance, slowing down in general, lengthening the time between Emily's communication and his response. The space created allows him to pause, notice, and process his reaction before he communicates back to her. It's not easy to notice and process in real time at first, but the more intimate we become with ourselves, the more we can recognize and even anticipate our patterns. I also suggested that Matthew step away from a budding conflict before it escalates. It's always okay to simply say, I'm not available for this right now, or I need to step away and figure out what's going on for me. Before Matthew and Emily can successfully address their issues with physical intimacy in their partnership, Matthew needs to spend some time getting emotionally intimate with himself. Owning his piece of the equation of their dynamic will free them both to communicate and problem solve efficiently at the root level. My father demonstrated this beautifully in the accidental death of Barney. He was clear about what his own feelings were and took responsibility for them, allowing me to be free and clear to process my own feelings without having them confused with his. I can imagine a situation in which a parent is unable to sit with the discomfort of their feelings when something goes wrong and blame their child as a way of deflecting their own guilt and shame. On the surface, it might appear to be the child's fault. At the root, though, the parent is handing the child what I always think of as a big bag of their own shit to deal with. I know well the kind of lasting damage this can cause because I'm often unpacking it years later when the child becomes my client. Here's the thing. If there are feelings in the room, someone is going to have to feel them. If we don't feel our own feelings ourselves, own our shit, we are forcing those we are engaged with to feel them for us. This is where it tends to get ugly. Often the person who isn't taking responsibility for their feelings doesn't realize that they are projecting them onto the person they are interacting with, who is confused themselves because they feel as if they are feeling something that isn't really authentically theirs to feel. You can imagine the emotional chaos that ensues when the two people who lack skill try to parse this out. This goes for parents, children, friends, lovers, baristas, Lyft drivers alike. The last thing that Rolf did in embodying emotional independence was to take responsibility for his impact. He knew intuitively that he shouldn't simply shuttle me off to ballet to distract me from my emotions. Suggesting that we go get an ice cream cone, his universal cure-all for anything that ails you, was his answer to the question, what does my daughter need in this moment, and how am I going to show up as the best father I can be? I'm not sure what he had going on that afternoon, but by making my emotional well-being a priority, he took to heart responsibility for the impact he could have on his daughter and adjusted his behavior accordingly. At first blush, this last piece of the emotional independence trifecta might seem contradictory to the idea that each of us needs to take ownership for their own feelings. Aren't we either responsible for our own feelings or each other's? Well, the answer is that while we are not responsible for each other's feelings, we must recognize that our words and actions affect others. If I tell the barista that I'm not happy with my latte, I can expect that they might receive that information and respond in some kind of way. They might apologize and offer to remake it. They might have a meltdown and feel like they are inadequate. They might get angry and tell me to fuck off. None of these ways is likely to have anything to do with me personally. Yet, as the person who communicated to the barista that the latte they just made is not satisfactory, I have to recognize that I had an impact on them. Now, if I choose to express my dissatisfaction by saying, hey, barista, you made this latte taste like ass, I can predict a different response than if I say, I can see how hard you're working and I hate to be a high maintenance customer, but my latte is a little off. My client Shobha came face to face with what it means to take responsibility for impact when she started dating Janine. They went out to dinner one night and ran into Shobha's ex-husband. Shobha hadn't told Nick that she was involved with someone new. He also had no idea that she decided to date women. In fact, Shobha had hidden from Nick for many years that she was bisexual. He knew she had had a relationship with a woman before they met, but she told him it was a one-off and that she wasn't attracted to women. Shobha wasn't flat out lying when she said it. The truth is, she was confused. Having grown up in a strict religious home, she was conflicted about her attraction to women and had been relieved to meet and marry Nick. But now that they were divorced, she decided to explore a relationship with a woman and met Janine on a dating website. The day after their chance meeting, Nick called Shobha. He was hurt and angry that she had not let him know that she was dating again, especially since she took Janine to a restaurant they used to frequent together. While Shobha tried to determine in real time whether she had done anything wrong, Nick's anger was focused on the betrayal of not having been forewarned that she had moved on. This made no sense to Shobha, since, after all, it was Nick who had ended the marriage more than a year ago. She certainly didn't owe him a status report on her dating life. Finally, at one point during their conversation, Nick said something that revealed to Shobha he had feelings about her dating a woman. Suddenly, it became clear. She understood. For the duration of their marriage, Nick had been insecure about her sexual orientation. She knew that. It had come up many times. Even though she had never done anything to betray Nick, she understood how her own confusion about her history and attraction to women had affected her husband. To be clear, their marriage ended for reasons that had nothing to do with this. In spite of this, or perhaps because of it, Shobha was able to take responsibility for her impact on Nick without feeling that she had done anything wrong. She acknowledged that Nick must have felt surprised and hurt and validated that his feelings made sense given their circumstances. Shobha's validation landed powerfully for Nick, and he shared that seeing her with a woman felt like his fears all those years were justified. It made him question everything he understood to be true. They were able to process together and find closure to some of the issues that they had dealt with during their marriage that remained unresolved in their divorce. It was a healing for both of them. Taking responsibility for impact is a way of listening into the space and crafting our words and actions to optimize the way we relate to others. If we are clumsy or unkind, we are likely to make an impact that requires an additional investment of our time, energy, and emotional labor to clean it up. If we don't clean it up, we leave a trail of unresolved conflict behind us. Make amends. In practical terms, that looks like anger, resentment, misunderstanding, sarcasm, ambivalence, mixed messages, entanglement, the opposite of emotional independence. The way in which we move through the world matters. As they say in backpacking, leave only footprints. Emotional independence is a worthwhile pursuit of overall self-care and well-being, and it's a complex enough topic to be worthy of its own book. The kind of self-awareness needed for the cultivation of emotional independence is a legitimate form of intimacy and a significant thread in the fabric of radical intimacy. Okay. Thank you. So So really what we're talking about here is emotional skill, and that sort of toggling between feeling like you're immersed in that very confusing emotional state of complexity with someone else trying to figure out. And you know, as people who have dealt with addiction, and many of us codependency, it's confusing, you know. And so those are some skills that I've sort of defined to be able to navigate being in the muck of it, and also being able to step back and work both angles of it. So I would love to hear what you have to say. In the story, Anya actually was very aware that her productivity was down. She just couldn't get herself to stop, to actually like apply herself, you know. So she was in this sort of constant state of overwhelm and catch up and not doing anything. Um, you know, it's interesting. I honestly feel like that self-defeating behavior, one of the the quickest, most effective things that I do with people is ask them, and this isn't necessarily mine, I've heard many different people sort of do this. One of it is like, what is the internal dialogue when you are in the midst of self-defeating behavior, and you can't, you, which basically means like you have a goal and you're acting in ways, you're behaving in ways that are not in alignment with that goal, that are counterproductive to that goal. That's kind of the definition of self-defeating behavior. So if you can get them thinking about like, what is it that is going on in your head? What's the chatter? What's the tape that runs, the self-defeating tape that runs? I'm not good enough. I won't succeed. Nobody understands me. Like there's some sort of self-defeating narrative that is going on. And sometimes they're not even quite aware that there is that. But once you say it, once you say like, what are you telling yourself? It's like, oh, the light bulb goes off, and just have them name freely all the bad negative thoughts about themselves, and then ask them whose voice that is, because they weren't born with that voice. Somebody actually planted those thoughts in their head, a parent, a teacher, you know, some sort of leader of some sort, a sibling. And then unwind that and replace the self-defeating thoughts with self-affirming thoughts. Well, I just, you know, if anybody is looking for communication models and ways to communicate effectively and harmoniously, nonviolent communication is the standard. So I would direct anybody to just reviewing the sort of principles and methodology of nonviolent communication. It's an enormous body of work, and there are all kinds of books and training courses and live and virtual. You know, all we can do is to speak authentically with I statements, you know, and not and avoid things like, you did this to me, or you're acting like a jerk. You know, if you want to say to somebody, you're you know, I don't like what you're saying, or you say, I don't like what you're saying, instead of you're being an idiot, or you're being a jerk. So there are just sort of that, all we can do is be truthful and authentic and speak from your own lived experience. You have to find your bottom line and find what your deal breaker is. And if you don't want to be in relationship with someone who's not in recovery, then there's your answer. You need to solve that issue before you can solve whether or not to have sex with this person. So you know, understand for yourself if that's a requirement of your well-being and your recovery. And if you don't want to be in a relationship with someone who is still drinking, then you need to say, I don't want to be in a relationship with someone who is still drinking. So I'm going to ask you lovingly, respectfully, if you want to be in a relationship with me, you're going to need to get sober. Otherwise, we need to complete the relationship and move on. That's it. My father said all the things that you said. This is my fault. This is, mom and I should have known. I should have not let the bird do this. This is, he really did take responsibility, sitting on that curb eating the ice cream, and he he also took me out to get a new pair of sandals. Like I could go and put in like the next week or whatever. He took me out to sort of pick out a new pair of shoes, and we never had another bird on the floor again. Like they learned the lesson. I didn't feel anger at that time at all. That wasn't one of the emotions that came up for me. But there are many times where I can sort of think back on my childhood and being angry at my dad. I mean, a lot, and especially in adolescence. And, yeah, I was able to, and my parents fought all the time. Like they were not all the time, but they were not opposed to expressing anger at each other either. So anger was alive and well in my childhood home. But in this situation, that wasn't part of the equation. And even looking back now, as a parent myself, I think, my poor dad, in that moment, like kind of going, and he was clumsy relationally. I mean, if I had my mother sitting next to me here, she would tell you all the ways in which my father was not emotionally skilled. And this story was a little bit like, wow, it was definitely a tragic moment and really a stellar moment for him as a father. So yeah, maybe one day I'll have an opportunity to, over a cup of tea, tell you all the ways in which I was angry at my dad.
Yeah.
And I don't, as a white woman, I really don't pretend to have the answers at all. All I can say is that you will have to find your balance of, like, being able to not take on what other people say and the sort of implied racism that you feel in the room, and be you. There you can. It's such a hard conversation, and you're inspiring me to actually give this some thought and maybe write about it. But I think, you just have to be you. And when you are faced with someone who says turn down or be quiet, not assume that they mean because you're a woman of color. And if there is an implication that that has something to do with it, then potentially address that. I'm not, I'm not feeling welcome here. I'm feeling judged. I have, and I want to talk about, whether this is a safe place for me. As a woman, I have had to do that in many spaces that are very male dominated, and I have a habit of calling people out in what I perceive and making them uncomfortable. And I'll share this with you. Before I had kids, is that true? Yes. Before I had kids, I was married to my husband. We were in our 20s, and I was working at a company. I had several sort of situations where someone was saying racist things to me, and had no idea that I was married to a black man. And by the way, I don't care who I was married to. I don't want to hear racist things, but this was just one of those situations where uh, I had called on an apartment. It was a beautiful building in its town that we wanted to move to, and like an old Victorian house that was broken up into apartments. And I thought, oh my goodness, I found the thing. I found my place. And and so I called. I didn't even need to see the apartment. We were going to go look at it, but I was on the phone with the landlady for an hour, and we got to know each other. She asked all about me and my husband and this and that, and we like it was just an ideal situation. And it was basically done. She's like, okay, meet me at the property tomorrow. I'm going to bring the lease, bring your checkbook. We're great. Just take a look at it, and that's that. And I said, okay, great. After an hour on the phone, I'm about to hang up, and she says, oh, wait, one more thing. There are no Black people living in the building, so it's nice and neat. And I said to her, without missing a beat, I said, oh, thank God, my husband's Black, and I'm picking up after him all the time. Never talked to her again. Didn't go see the apartment, walked away from it, you know? So there's a way of, that was a little sarcastic. Maybe it's not exactly emotional independence, but there's a way of surfacing and saying to someone like, I am here, I am me, I am who I am. I'm good in my skin, and I'm not taking it on, nor am I, I'm not going to sort of conform. I hope that's helpful. And cut people out of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely can cut people out of your life. And and so it kind of goes like this. Before you make the chop, there are a few things to try. And one of those is, I'm not available for this right now. I'm not available for this. I'm not taking that on. I'm not um I'm I I'm not going to engage with you around this. um it's, I think that there's a way of at starting to enforce a boundary. We are, especially family members, we are taught, I mean, there's that phrase, I've said it, but I don't think I made it up. um my mother pushes all the buttons that she installed. She knows where they are. She knows where to go find them. At 59 and my mother's 92, there isn't a lot of button pushing going on anymore. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think what it really comes down to is whether they're family or not, you need to do some good boundary work to align in your values, to know who you are, to define those values as guiding principles and sort of a measuring stick against which you decide what behavior you're going to accept or not accept in your life. If it's a family member that you feel, that is close, that you really are unwilling to cut out in it, from your life, then maybe there's some outside help around that. Maybe there's therapy. Maybe there's a more delicate conversation. I'll tell you, there was a point in my life where I really my I was my mother was unbelievably codependent and enmeshed with me. She's not an addict, but her mother was schizophrenic. So she has a lot of stuff that she's worked through in her life around that from a pretty traumatic childhood. So one of the things that I've done with my mother is change my reactions to her and change the way I show up in the relationship. And as I started to evolve and change, she changed. She had to change. She didn't have any choice because I didn't engage in the conversations in the same way. So it interrupted her patterns of relating to me and getting her tentacles into my emotional life to make arrangements. And so there is that as well. The cleaner you get, the healthier you get, the more skillful you get, and the more emotionally independent you get, the more you can show up in a way that creates a felt sense of boundary in the people around you. In case really what you're needing is validation, I'm just going to tell you that you are worthy of love and belonging, and that you are you're born into a human body, and you deserve to be loved and to give and receive love freely. So there's your validation. The other piece of it is that, look, we have all of this focus and importance on pair bonding for life. I don't subscribe to that. I think it's great if you meet somebody and you want to do the long haul with them. That is fabulous, and more power to you. And I'm here to support you the whole way. I also feel like there are plenty of times and plenty of relationships where they come in, and then we learn what we learn, and we grow in certain ways, and then we complete them. And that's our prerogative to do it. It doesn't mean the relationship failed. I can't stand when people say marriages fail. I've been married. This is my third, it's really technically my second husband, but I've had 3 long-term monogamous relationships. Um, and none of those relationships failed. None of those marriages failed. They were beautiful, wonderful relationships. One of them, my husband, my ex-husband is super close. He's one of my dearest friends. He knows me better than anybody, really. I mean, better than my husband of 7 years could. So, and the other one, we're not friends, because of a lot of variety of reasons, but we co-parent well, and that's that. This idea, so let go of the idea that there's something wrong with the fact that the relationship ended. The other thing is that this sounds terribly unromantic, but we have relationships with each other to work out our shit. Relationships are the boot camp of self-realization. And we play roles for each other, and we create our partners to be whoever we need them to be in order to heal our wounds. It's a big sort of laboratory of human relationship. And so it's not like this sort of storybook kind of thing. You will have a wonderful partner at when you're ready to have a wonderful partner. And from my perspective, separate out the chatter, right? All those internal narratives and the could I have done it, and did I do the right thing, and all the self-questioning, and just close it, walk away from it. I made the decision. It was the best decision that I knew how to make at the time. And here I am now, and I'm working on myself, and I'm becoming a better person, and I'm working my steps, and I'm sober, and I'm gearing up for a healthy relationship with someone who doesn't speak aggressively to me, because that's a deal breaker for me now. Thank God I had that relationship, because I learned that. One is that if you pick up my book, there are 3 kinds of intimacy: emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, energetic intimacy. You can use energetic intimacy to bridge the gap. It's neutral territory. So one of you wants to connect, feels most connected by deep emotional connection. The other one, it feels much more connected and safe, feels connected through physical intimacy, but he's scared. It's not his native language. I'm not giving him excuses for not doing his work. But what you feel is not a willful, likely, without knowing you personally, it's probably not a willful neglect of your emotional needs. It's a like he's trying to speak a different language with a different alphabet, and vice versa, probably. So you can work that energetic intimacy, which is shared experiences, noticing what's around you in the world, talking about things that don't have anything to do with your situation, your life, your family, like going outside and noticing all the beauty in the world, being of service in the world. If you do something together, get involved in a service project, feed the hungry, do all those things, that's connective and emotional. The other thing is that well, I'm gonna stop there. But this is a common problem, and there are ways for you to meet each other. There are ways for you to meet each other, but it takes some work. The book will help. And I think there's an aspect of the oh gosh. Okay. Well, I'm hesitating because I don't want to get on my I don't want to it's a whole other workshop, and probably not in a recovery community, to really go deep and embrace pain as a teacher, right? But the pain that you feel at the loss of a relationship, or
Mhm.
at the in the turmoil, in the breakdown and ruptures of a relationship, well, shoot, isn't that a wonderful invitation and a practice into self-development and emotional healing, right? The pain that you're experiencing in a relationship is the pain that you're trying to heal, probably from childhood, right? And to be more skillful. So in that sense, painful relationships and ruptures and breakups are a gift. It's all a gift, and life is happening for you, not to you, you know? So, yes, you are certainly not alone. And really, the more you meet yourself, the stronger you're going to be able to be in order to engage with someone else. If you don't yet follow Kate Anthony, she is brilliant. She's got a podcast called oh no, the she has a program called Should I Stay or Should I Go? She has a podcast that's like a New York Times award-winning podcast, and she's my friend, like my little friend. She her podcast is the Divorce Survival Guide, and she is coming out with a book. I think it hits spring of 2024, called The D Word. She is brilliant. kateanthony.com. You know what? I don't have answers. It's infuriating, and especially when you've got kids that you're trying to protect. I will say that therapy for everybody is so incredibly helpful. I mean, it just is. And there's such really look for, if you don't have a therapist and you're looking for one, really look for someone who understands abusive, narcissistic, borderline, whatever you're dealing with, really understands what that kind of manipulative behavior can be. Um, and um, and just fortify yourself. There's so much good material out there, but it's really just a matter of being centered and being and not hiding things from the kids. I've grown up with a difficult partner. He's fabulous in some ways, and he's very limited in some ways. And I let my son talk about the limitations. I let him talk about the frustrations, and I validate his feelings about all of this. And I let him know, your dad loves you backwards and forwards till Tuesday. And he's got some stuff going on. And it's not you. This is his maladaptive coping mechanisms, said in kid language. I hope that helps.